There's one line in this episode I'm about to talk about that is the single greatest piece of dialogue in the entirety of the Fate series. But before that, Fate Zero is many things. It's the kind of story that makes no apologies for the stuff it does to you. Big battles, big deaths, big politics, episode after episode after episode. It barely lets you breathe. So imagine my situation when, somewhere in the middle of all that, three kings just sit down, pour some wine, and talk. And I kid you not, it hit just as hard on the rewatch as it did the first time. A huge part of that is the OST. If you haven't noticed, which I think is criminal, Fate Zero's soundtrack is literally one of the best I've ever come across in anime. It's so good that it feels less like it's accompanying scenes but rather becoming them. Every verbal exchange in this episode lands with twice the weight it would have otherwise. That said, let's talk about what's actually happening here. The Grail Dialogue, episode 11 of Fate Zero, is an outlier in every sense of the word. In a series that moves fast and hits harder every episode, this one taps the brakes completely. And what makes this even more interesting is who initiated it. It was Ryder's idea. He proposed that if heroic spirits could settle their rankings through conversation, they could determine who wins the Grail without any bloodshed. Honestly, that coming from Ryder of all people surprises me. He's normally the most erratic and impulsive person based on what we've seen so far, and it tells you quite a bit about him before the debate even begins. But we'll get there. Three servants, Gilgamesh, Saber, and Ryder, end up in the same place, and rather than killing each other on sight, they debate a single question. What does it mean to be a king? Let me clear something up first. This isn't me breaking down who wins the argument. Philosophy doesn't work in wins and losses. That's not how it's designed. What I'm actually interested in is what each answer reveals about who these people are. Even if you're not particularly interested in philosophy, trust me, this gets interesting. Let's start with Gilgamesh. He needs the least time and the most acknowledgement. Gilgamesh is insufferably arrogant, egoistic, and prideful to a degree that should make him genuinely unbearable. And yet, you cannot deny the man has the charisma of a king. His presence alone commands the room before he even opens his mouth, more like he doesn't even need to open his mouth. When Ryder asks him on what grounds his principles stand, Gilgamesh's answer is essentially, my law, the law I set as rightful king. That's it. That's his whole philosophy. His law is law because he decided it is. And surprisingly, Ryder actually respects it. Living by one's own absolute law to Ryder is the very epitome of kingship. So even Gilgamesh's most extreme position has a legitimate foundation. He just takes it further than anyone else is willing to go. But Gilgamesh isn't really what this episode is about. Now, Saber. Something I should probably mention is that Saber was actually the one who started this whole philosophical debate. She brought up the question of what a true king should be, and in doing so, she reveals her wish for the Grail, to undo the past, to go back and save Britannia. That wish is the most honored thing about her because it tells you exactly what she thinks of her reign as king, that it failed, that it was her responsibility, that if she could just go back and do it differently, everything would be fine. Her philosophy is martyrdom. A king suffers for the people. A king carries every death, every failure, and every loss personally. She said herself in this episode, kings are martyrs to their ideals. She martyred herself so completely over Camelot's fall that she'd rather erase her entire reign than carry the weight of it forward. That is tragedy. Deeply, genuinely tragic. But that's what Ryder's argument is. Ryder's philosophy is the complete opposite of Saber's, and it takes up the most space in this episode. Rightly so. His position, the king does not devote himself to the people. It is a nation and the people who must devote themselves to the king. A direct counter to everything Saber stands for. And when she calls him a tyrant for it, he goes even further. If a king regrets his rule, if a king looks back at how his reign ended and wishes it had gone differently, then he is worse than a tyrant. Now, think about what that means coming from Ryder specifically. His empire collapsed, civil war tore it apart, his heirs were slain. By any measure, Ryder's rule ended in total disaster, and yet he refuses to regret it because those outcomes came at the permanent cost of his retainers' lives, his people's sacrifices, decisions he made as king. To wish it all away, to use the Grail to undo it like Saber wants to, would be to dishonor every sacrifice ever made under his name. And that right there is what separates Ryder's philosophy from simple arrogance. He's not saying the king is above accountability. What he means is that the king must be so committed to his decisions that he owns their consequences forever, including the ugly ones, especially the ugly ones. He puts it like this: a king must be greedier than anyone else, must rage louder, laugh longer, embody the full extreme of everything good and everything evil, so completely that his retainers both envy and adore him for it. Not a perfect ruler, but an extraordinary human being. And this is what I mentioned at the start. Ryder turns to Saber and says something that I think is the single most important line in the entire episode. Paraphrasing here. You may have saved them, but you never led them. You never showed them what a king should really be. I felt that on the first watch. I felt it again on the rewatch. Don't get this wrong, Ryder isn't calling Saber evil or incompetent or whatever. He's just saying she was so locked into her ideals, so committed to being good, to being a saint, that she never made the decisions a king sometimes has to make that no idealist can ever bring themselves to make. She followed her pretty ideals straight to the end, and her people paid for it. The critique here is that she let her own ideals become more important than her people's actual needs. A king who cannot be cruel when cruelty is necessary is no king. They're just someone who didn't want to get their hands dirty. Interestingly though, and this is something I also appreciate seeing, Saber doesn't change her stance on kingship. I mean, how could she? He's been with her for decades, maybe even centuries, I'm not sure. The Grail Dialogue does something I genuinely didn't think was possible for me personally. I'm not someone who gets much out of rewatches. First time impact is almost always greater. That's just how I work personally. So when I sat down to rewatch this episode for this video and felt everything I did the first time, it caught me off guard. That doesn't happen. It never happens, except this time it did. This episode isn't just a philosophical debate between three kings. That's what it looks like, yes, but what it actually is the most efficient character study I've ever seen for three people at the same time, in a single episode, by the way. By the time it ends, you don't just understand how they fight, you understand their souls. You know why each of them leads the way they lead and ultimately falls the way they fall. Most animes would spread this across multiple episodes and flashbacks. Fate Zero put three characters in a room, let them talk, and somehow that was enough. I've watched a lot of anime. A lot of it is beautiful in the way spectacle is beautiful. Loud, explosive, immediately impressive. And there's nothing wrong with that, genuinely. But the Grail Dialogue is beautiful in a different way. It doesn't need to raise its voice to leave a mark, because everything it says lands with the weight of people who have actually lived it or died for it. Three kings, one question, no answer. And that right there is everything I want from a story.